So good evening. Welcome to the 2025 AGM of the Victoria Natural History Society, also affectionately known as Nature Victoria.
I'm going to turn that on just in case it does pick you up.
Okay. So on the screen, you'll see the agenda for the business meeting tonight. My name is Andrew Harcombe. I'm the president of Nature Victoria. I just actually came onto the board partway through this last year and immediately got shunted into the president's chair. My background, I'm a conservation biologist. I worked most of my career with the BC Ministry of Environment. And then for the last 9 years, I was a conservation scientist with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the BC region. And then I retired and from the paid work and continued on the unpaid volunteer work. So I'm also on the board of the Rocky Point Bird Observatory and on the Habitat Acquisition Trust Foundation. So, and I was calculating a few months ago that I've actually spent about 65 years on a series of boards through my career. So I think that's one reason why I got moved into the president's chair. So the first on the agenda is approving the agenda. So are there any additions or deletions anybody would like to make? If not, I'd like to move acceptance of the agenda. Could I have a seconder, please? Gail, thank you. All those in favor? I like the business going through fairly quickly. So the second one is the approval of the minutes from the last AGM that was held in April 9th, 2024. I was not present at that because I think I was sick or away. I can't remember. Anyhow, are there any comments or deletions, additions anybody would like to make to the minutes from last year? Otherwise, could I have a motion to move those minutes, please? Okay, thank you, Vicky. And seconded by Walter. I want to call you Wayne for some reason. Sorry, Walter. All those in favor? Approved. Thank you. I hate this problem with putting glasses on and off. I think I'm going to have to get a progressive set so I can just keep them on. But so I don't believe there's any business arising from those minutes, so we can skip that. So the next up is Gordon to give the treasurer's report, and we'll kindly get that on the screen for you.
One moment, please. I'm used to having two screens going.
Oh, yeah.
See, this is what I want. And just the arrows here will get you going where you need to go. So forward
Okay.
arrows.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, everybody, I'm Gordon Hart, the treasurer of the society, and I'm presenting the report for. I think I need a microphone. Absolutely, okay. Andrew didn't need one. Anyway, so the treasurer's report for the 2024 year end. Really, eh?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, the financial position of the society remains excellent with no major changes in revenue and expenses. We've been spending a bit more in an effort to update our website, still ongoing, and do some strategic planning for the present and future health of the society. Being a volunteer-run organization, most of our money goes to conservation and other nature-related purposes. I'll just start with the first screen showing the statement of financial position. I would have, what's happening here?
That's the first one you have to do.
Yeah, okay, good. There it is. So on the first screen, we can see money in the bank and
Is it possible to enlarge those pictures?
I know it's a bit, I don't know whether I can do that or not.
I don't think so.
No, I don't know what, I can either send you a copy later or I can, or maybe put them in the magazine or something if people, suffice to say that all I was going to say is, okay, sorry. All I was going to say was that in summary, we have over $1 million in assets and investments, similar to last year, and minimal liabilities, $15 to be exact. The second screen here. Oh yeah, the format looks a little different than I had to put it in a different format, so it looks a little bit different. But the second page here shows revenue from our dues, donations, and investments, and some other smaller sources. And oh, hi Tom. And the money in shows that overall revenue increased slightly, mostly due to favorable investment returns, with dues and donations being similar to last year. The bottom half shows money out, with expenses being only slightly more than last year, and all three funds being in good shape for the coming years. And there are two more screens. The first one is the conservation fund. The format looks a little different than I had expected, but oh well. This fund is money that is kept separate from our operating funds, and it's used only for conservation purposes, either directly or through donations to like-minded organizations. The details of which groups and so on will be mentioned in the president's report. And the last screen is the scholarship fund. The scholarships and awards supported by VNHS are of two types. Some are funded in full, endowed, so that the university maintains the funds and disperses awards as required. Two are at UVic, the Freeman F. King Scholarship and the Dennis and Lindis Davis Scholarship. And one is at Royal Roads, the VNHS Royal Roads University Bursary. We just got a thank you letter from Royal Roads from a very appreciative student. The second type of award is funded by the society annually, and the money for this comes from our pooled investments. So at the University of Victoria, we fund 4 awards at $1,000 each, and a further $2,000 in order for the endowed scholarships to maintain or increase their value. That's the expenses here, if you can't read it, are $6,000 for UVic and $1,000 for the Camosun College bursary. That's basically it. The scholarship fund is in excellent shape for the years ahead. And that concludes my report. And as I mentioned, if anyone wants to have a copy of the statements, please let me know. And unless there are questions, I would like to move that the report be accepted. Okay, Andrew seconds. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon.
Okay. That's back.
You can just ignore me.
That's great. Thank you.
You want your president's report? Oh, okay.
Because I was new to this position with Nature Victoria, I've basically taken the president's report format from last year and kind of updated the information. So if you think you've heard some of this before, you probably have. So my first note was I want to ensure all of you that there will be no tariffs on tonight's meeting. So it'll be totally free. Because I think the organization is probably about the same age as that unnamed president, 81 years old. I'm not sure, can't remember how old Trump is. we are 81 years old. So I'd like to start off by thanking two directors that left the board during this past year for various family reasons. One is Rick Searle, who served as president for about a year and a half. And the other is Gail Lasner, who was, she hosted the Natural History Nights, and she also represented Rocky Point Bird Observatory, bringing that information to the Nature Victoria Board. And then I'd also like to thank Stephen Rattan, who's here tonight, who's decided he's not going to put himself up for re-election. And I can't remember how many years Stephen's been on the board, but
We can't either.
it's quite, yeah, a goodly number of years. The other thing is, I say for several years. And one of the things we decided to make our year-to-year sort of business operate smoothly, we didn't want to have all the board members who sit for 2-year terms to have everybody's term end at the same time. And potentially you could end up with a brand new board and you don't have that continuity of history. So in order to stagger those, make sure those terms of our existing or hopefully newly elected directors, for that better continuity, 3 of the present directors have resigned, but they're standing for re-election tonight for a new 2-year term. So that's the way we get them staggered. So talking briefly about accomplishments of the last year, as Gordon mentioned, we provided financial support to other like-minded conservation organizations. So there's money given to the Rocky Point Bird Observatory Society to help them with their banding operations and their public education program. We gave money to the Habitat Acquisition Trust for support on getting the new tribal park designated at Mary Hill. It involved a lot of sort of administrative organization detail over a number of years, and Hat kind of took the coordination role on at that. And if you hadn't heard already, that the Beecher Band recently, I think, had an 81% approval rating to when they get Mary Hill from the federal government to turn it into a nature tribal park. So that's, wonderful news from a conservation perspective. And we helped that process along by contributing to that. And then Gordon also talked about the 7 different scholarships that we award to University of Victoria, Royal Roads University, and Camosun College. And we've also supported the Vancouver Island Science Regional Science Fair. I'll get it right. There's Jim Cuthbert, one of our directors, takes the lead on. Some of our other key activities, we attended a whole lot of different sort of public outreach events, including things like World Migratory Bird Week, Camas Day, Christmas bird counts, and butterfly counts. We organized regular evening presentations in the bird and marine environment. For a while, we had some natural history talks, and if you read the board report, I think in one of the latest naturalists, it has that plea in it for we're looking for volunteers to help us with those other 2 evening presentation topics, natural history and botany. And so far, once James Muskelly left, he no longer coordinates the botany presentations. We've asked a number of botanists and haven't had any luck getting those people yet. So if that's something that turns your crank or interests you, please let us know. We prepared and distributed 6 issues of the bi-monthly Victoria Naturalist magazine, which you can either get as a hard copy in black and white, or what I would suggest you might prefer, if you get the PDF form electronically, then all the photographs are in color. And as nice as black and white is, nothing beats that color presentation. We've written several advocacy letters around things like stopping the local herring fishery. And so that went to the federal government. And we've also been involved in conservation planning on Panama Flats. And I guess I'd like to sort of finish with sort of gratitude and appreciation for those people that have been volunteering for various activities of the society, putting their time and energy into that. So that'd be our directors, Gordon Hart, Ken Walker, just put your hand up when Ken Walker looks after our membership. Brian Wilkes, who's not with us here tonight. Stephen Rattan, who I just mentioned. Vicky Metcalf. Vicky looks after coordinates our volunteering. And of course, even though you've got some official position on the board, the directors help out with all sorts of different activities. Jim Cuthbert, who I mentioned, looked after our science fair activity and some of our advocacy roles. Gail Harcombe, who's the editor of the Naturalist magazine, and she's been doing that for 15 years. Wow. Didn't realize. So you quite that long. Monica Panigan. She's been helping us organize. She and her partner Praveen are sort of IT younger people that understand Google Drives and Google Mail and all those kind of things. And Praveen especially is a super teacher, trying to teach us old fogies how to operate these systems. Praveen, I'm going to say it. Let's see. Palmarage? Okay. Okay. Rick Searle, who I mentioned, has left the board in the summertime, and Gail Lasner, who left it in this fall. Also like to thank our field trip coordinators. We have 4 that are involved with the birding trips: Kevin Slagboon, Ben Van Dremelen, David Riddell, and Susanna Selecki. And then Mary Morris has been coordinating our marine field trips. She's just taking on that role just starting a few months ago. And Elizabeth Eastern is now taking on the role of coordinating our botany field trips. And hopefully you'll see, if you follow the online calendar or look in the magazine, we try to list the various field trips when we can. But the best way of keeping up to date on track is to monitor the calendar. And I also finally finish up by thanking our presentation hosts. So Ann Nightingale, who looks after the bird presentations, Heidi Gardner, who looks after our marine presentations, and then, as I mentioned, James Miskelly did it with our botany stuff at the beginning of the year, and Galia Lasner looked after some of the presentations for the Natural History Night. So I think that's all I wish to say at this time on that. Just let me check the agenda. So I don't think do we have to have any sort of a vote on the president's report? No, that's good. So the next thing on the agenda is the election of our directors, and Ken Walker is going to take the lead on that.
Well, I'm going to start by saying I'd like you all to think about putting your name forward as a director. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about that.
Time's up. And by the way, we elect our directors at our AGM, but at any time between AGMs, the existing board can appoint people into those directorships, and then they stand up for election at the next AGM.
So to go very quickly over the people who are remaining on the board, as Andrew said, 6 of them are existing members who are going to be standing for another term, or will be extending or continuing their terms, I should say. So that's Gordon, Jim, Gail, Monica, Vicky, and myself. So we'll have another year. There are 3 people who have, so we have a board of, we have 12 positions on our board. And we have 3 people who have already put their names forward to start a 2-year term. Okay, so those people are Praveen and Andrew. And the other person who is not here tonight is Brian, but he has also put his name forward. So we would like to hear from other people, if there's anybody here who would like to put their name forward, because we have 3 additional spots on the board. And you can put your name forward now. What's the duty? The duties. All right, well, we meet once a month on the first Tuesday of the month. Most recently that we've been having Zoom calls, but we also try to have the occasional face-to-face get together. The meetings last about an hour and a half. We also will have a retreat. That may be the first opportunity for more board members to join the board and to get to know what's going on. So we'll have a retreat probably in April. The duties are quite varied. To start with, it might just be attending the board meetings and getting kind of an understanding of the organization and what we do. But there's lots of other responsibilities people take care of. All of the things that we mentioned, the membership, being the treasurer, helping out with the website, helping out with the volunteers, helping out with the programs we put on, helping out with science fair programs. What else do we? Yes, Vicki?
Representing Nature Victoria.
That's right. We have it represented. Yeah, for instance, Vicki is the representative with Naturehood and also with the Esquimalt Lagoon Society, and are there other ones? Oh, and also helping out with the production of the magazine. You know, that's lots of work that goes on there. So those are kind of a range of the things that we do. And as I said, there's usually an opportunity to get to your feet under before you can take things on. Jim?
You may have mentioned this, but conservation advocacy.
Oh, yes, sorry, I did not mention that. I appreciate that because both Brian and Jim have been working on how we can advocate for what we stand for. So it's writing letters or meeting with city councils or the staff of city councils. And actually, we have someone who's going to speak about another issue later on this evening. So that's another thing. We have sort of an advocacy group as well. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
All right.
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Ann Nightingale and I'm not on the board, but I am a past president. And I love the question about what it involves because the question, we'll throw that question back to you. What would you like to do? Every initiative that the NHS has undertaken was because there was a champion on the board to take it on. So if you want to build a viewing platform, if you want to do some habitat conservation, the BNHS board is a great place for you to be able to rally the troops to help you with that. So if you are a member of the society and have something that you could say, I really wish that maybe would do this, regardless of what it is, more education for kids, more education for adults. Like say a structure that you'd like to see built, the way to make that happen is to join the board, right? Because as soon as there's someone who says, I'll need this, but I need 30 volunteers to help me with this, you'll get the volunteers. It's just that we need people to come with their ideas of what Nature Victoria should be doing and be those people to make it happen.
Another thing that we can help with is getting the word out about what we do. So as Andrew mentioned, you know, we're in an era now where people are on social media all the time. So how can we use that to use those avenues to get our word out? So we have a Facebook page, but perhaps there's other techniques that we could use, not only to diversify, but maybe to have younger people join us as well. Okay, so having said that, would anybody like to put their name forward to join us on the board? As Andrew also mentioned, yes.
I was gonna say they can talk to us later if they don't want to say it right now.
Yeah, and I think that's fair enough, because we will have, if nobody else puts their name forward, we will have 3 vacancies, and we can appoint a member if someone expresses interest. Vicky?
There's also people on Zoom.
Oh, that's right. Is there a way of knowing that?
There's a little chat. They follow on the bottom of the computer in front of you.
Okay.
Someone has put in a question. I don't know whether anybody in the room wanted to raise their hand or speak up. They could put something in the chat. That's fine.
Okay. Oops, sorry. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. And perhaps you'll like to come up and talk to one of the members afterwards, and we can give you some more information. Otherwise, I would, I don't think we need to have an election. I think if there's, so the 3 people that we're asking, well, we'd like to accept on the board are Praveen and Andrew and Brian in his absence. Everyone Everybody happy with that? Okay, well, I'd like to say that those members, those gentlemen are, people are accepted by acclamation in that case. Okay, thank you very much.
That message, I can fix that.
Brian, I think you took my agenda.
Oh, obvious.
Has put her hand up.
Let's get a thumbs up.
Yeah, it will. Put her hand up. You might ask her if she wants to speak.
So do you want to speak, Mary?
No, thank you. I was just giving you a thumbs up for changing the view on
Oh.
the screen.
Thank you. So the last main part of business, part of the business meeting has to do with our awards. And we have our Distinguished Service Award that we give out not every year, but to one or more members that have sort of shown through their volunteer activities for a diversity of activities, have shown their strong support for the Victoria Natural History Society. So the nomination, the award this year will be given to a person, and I just want to read out a couple of the sentences part of the proposed nomination, the letter that we received in support of this nomination. He's been involved, contributed significantly over the years in all the various activities of the society, including writing many articles and doing presentations. He's provided a series of articles on a variety of topics for the naturalist, including excellent photography. He's given presentations to school as well as other interested groups. He's participated in and helped organize field trips and regional bird and butterfly counts around Victoria and in other districts when they're short of volunteers. He's very knowledgeable and always ready and willing to share his knowledge with his associates, both young and old. He's also been involved in a number of other provincial natural history organizations and is without doubt deserving of this award. So with no further ado, I can find it. I'd like to give this Distinguished Service Award to Val George. So, please. Somebody could volunteer to take a photograph, please. On your iPhone or whatever.
I think you were talking about.
Well, who did you think we were talking about?
I got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations, sir. I thank you so much for all you've done. So there's no other business that anybody wants to add to the agenda. I'd like to adjourn the business meeting. Oh, we do that under other business? Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Van Radio. I live in Victoria. I live in Gonzales. I just out of curiosity, how many people here live in the city of Victoria? So, a third, let's say. I wonder how many people are aware of the draft official committee plan that the councillors have prepared for or will be approving. Anyway, what they're proposing is 4 stories on every single lot in Victoria. So you can, if you can do any kind of land accumulation, you can build a 4-story building anywhere now. That's what they're proposing. And it goes up from there. 6 stories. Where I live in Gonzales, my street would be 4 stories. 1 street over would be 6 stories. And all major intersections practically, I think, will be 10 stories. So how does this affect nature? Well, we'll lose all our trees. 60 to 70% of the trees that exist in Victoria are on private land. And in Gonzales, where I live, we lost, with 2 developments, we lost 25 hairy oak in just 6 months. So that was a huge loss. And so I guess I'm coming to this group to see if I'm trying to organize all the neighborhoods to get involved, to try and send a message to council that this isn't acceptable, that we care about nature, we care about trees. And we have to try and somehow get through to these councillors that there's more to Victoria than just buildings. So I was going to ask if the NHS could either write a letter, or if members here could, city council, well, tomorrow actually, city council's having what they call a, well, I don't know what the name of it is, but they're gonna allow for 15 speakers at 5 minutes each, and I don't know if all the slots are taken up. But they're at the beginning of every council meeting, they do allow speakers to address council. And so right now, council, they're only listening to the development industry and Homes for Living. We don't know who they are. And I don't think they're hearing from the general public really about what they want Victoria to look like. So, so yes, I guess I'm asking for a letter from the NHS. And if anybody would like to learn more about it, if they want to talk to me, I'm trying to work with 11 neighbors. As I say, I've got about 7 or 8 neighborhoods that I'm in contact with. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. If you want to know more, you can come speak to me later.
All right, thank you. I think that often is a common problem, because we got 13 different municipalities with 13 different official community plans. And they're often of a flavor that aren't particularly friendly for conservation. So thank you for bringing that forward. So hearing on no other new business, I'd like to call for adjournment of the business meeting. We'll have about a 10 or 15-minute break, and then I'll give my presentation on the natural history of Borneo. So please, you've probably been helping yourself already, but we've got the decaf coffee, tea, pop, and various edibles there. So please don't leave stuff for us to take home. Not that kind of edible.
Okay, so those of you in the Zoom room can take about a 10-minute break, and then we will be back. We'll pause the recording for now, and hopefully I'll remember to turn it back on when we get back.
I'm saying your name, yeah.
That's pretty good though. Yep.
It would be nice if that one got turned off. That would be best. You can't cheat.
Not very easily.
You see that?
Yep.
I can give you more light.
No, I can see. I can see. So in March 2024, Gail and I went on primarily a bird watching trip to the island of Borneo, and also the south end of the Malayan peninsula out of Kuala Lumpur. it was an organized trip through Avery Tours, Avery, no, Avocet Tours out of Kelowna. Avery Bartels was our main guide, and then for the in-country group, they provided not only looked after all the logistics, including another bird guide and driver and all our accommodation and food and stuff. So we just kind of got to go along for a wonderful ride. The majority of the photographs in this presentation are taken by Gail, and where they're not, I've noted on the slide who did them.
There goes. Get that for you. The rest should be fine.
Okay. So I grew up under the impression that Borneo was a country. Borneo is actually the third largest island in the world after Greenland and Guinea. And it's actually composed of 3 countries. Part of it's about a quarter of it is governed by Malaysia. About 3/4 of it was governed by Indonesia. And there's a tiny little private country or country there called Brunei, which is operated as an independent. I think it's a very rich little country. They got their money from the oil industry. Specifically, we went to the Malaysian province of Sabah, which is up in the northeast corner. Sort of it's circled roughly there in red. You can kind of see the general topography of the island. It's got a lot of lowland rainforest, more mountainous, hilly country. It's about the island itself is about 750,000 square kilometers. So, fairly large. And what I've done is I've sort of divided up the slideshow into sort of 3 parts, crudely based on sort of general ecosystems. Sort of ecosystem groups. So I've got a group there. The first one's to do with water and upland sort of interface. So that would be things like estuaries, mangrove swamps, rivers, lakes, ponds. Here are a couple of examples of those ecosystems. And you can see in these on the mangrove forest, you can see that, the tide's obviously out today, but you can see how high the water goes when the tide comes in. So it's a very dynamic ecosystem. They're all these floodplains and stuff are also very dynamic and often very rich in biodiversity. Fortunately, we got to do some of our trip by day trips on boats, which is a wonderful way of seeing both the ecosystems, and you get to see all the monkeys and the birds and the apes and anything else that's around that day, both in and out of the water. As I said, some of the rivers are sort of in the tidal estuarine influence. And there is, of course, a lot of fresh water because parts of it where this was taken, for example, it has about 10 feet of rainfall per year. So it's a sort of a true definition of a rainforest. And you get it more inland in the more undisturbed areas, the water's pretty clear. And here's a shot of the group in the boat out enjoying nature. So starting off in the mangrove area where you get a lot of exposed mud flats twice a day. This is a striated heron, also called also called a mangrove heron. Now this is an interesting little animal. This one is only about 2 or 3 inches long. It's called a mud skipper. And mud skipper is one of those animals that's kind of a living example of something that's almost like a fish, but also sort of terrestrial like a salamander. So it spends some of its life in the water and some of the life out of the water. Apparently in their gills, they're able to carry air pockets in the gills. So when they're out in a terrestrial situation like this, they're breathing air. And then when they're in the water, they're breathing through their gills. The front pectoral fins on a mud skipper are jointed, so they actually can operate sort of like legs. And they get their name by using those legs, they can scoot across the top of the mud or skip across the top of the mud, therefore are mud skippers. I'd read about these in books before, but I never got the chance to see one. Unfortunately, we had a bridge on a boardwalk going through the mangrove swamp, and you can take some neat photographs from the bridge. There's also these really colorful fiddler crabs that live in exactly the same kind of habitat. And these are just two extreme examples of males in full breeding color. As you can well expect, in the aquatic terrestrial interface, it's obviously a common habitat for a lot of different kingfishers. And these are just two of the ones that we saw during the trip. Again, when you're sitting there in the boat and you're cruising along the water, you know, you get a wonderful opportunity to get some of these guys sitting looking for fish. Now, the common sandpiper is just very similar to our spotted sandpiper. And it's pretty widespread there. But again, always associated sort of with the mud flats and the edges of the water bodies. Now, we have a couple of different species of night heron in North America. This one is a rufous night heron. This is the mature male. They get really nice plumes on their head when they're in breeding plumage, and they tend to do most of their feeding at night. And then in the daytime, you'll find a few little deciduous trees beside the water, and it'll be filled with like a whole roost of these herons. And I think our what's the one in the rifle?
The black crown.
Black crown night heron does the same thing. You tend to get a roost area where they're all sitting up on the bushes. Now, this lovely example is of an estuarine crocodile. This is probably the world's biggest crocodile. It gets up to about 1,500 kilograms. They're man-eaters, and a lot of the locals are absolutely scared to death of these things. So they're all right when they're sitting on the shore like that, or that guy comes in the water, that boatman's out of here. But you can see when they're just sitting there and just roosting on the shore, they're quite well camouflaged. Storm stork is a fairly rare stork. I think there's only about 500 of them left in the world. And this is a group of juveniles that we saw busy feeding on the shore. As I said, the talk was about the natural history, so I kind of jump around into all sorts of different animal and plant groups as we go by. This lovely fellow reminds me of Jim Durante. It's theorized that the shape and size of the nose is a breeding characteristic, and the bigger the nose, the more preferential that male is for the females. And it's not too hard to imagine that the DNA of these guys is not that far off from our DNA. You probably see some similarities there. Brahminy kites, these are there's an immature one on the right, mature one sitting in the tree there. And these are always sort of found right along coastlines. And they'll eat all sorts of different things, including fish. But when you get a big, mature adult flying, they're pretty spectacular. This is black and red broadbill, hence a nest over water. And I'll be showing another broadbill later on. That's a fruit eater. This one primarily eats insects and other arthropods. And you can see him gathering nesting materials there in the cobwebs. So he probably had nest building very close by. The common green shank. If you saw this from a distance in North America, you say that'd be like a greater yellow leg. So it's kind of the Asian equivalent of a greater yellow legs, and they're very widespread. I just really like the colors, the green colors that sort of match the name of this bird in this photograph. So I'll move into the lowland rainforest part of the talk. These are very varied. Obviously, they've been highly disturbed in certain areas. So We saw a lot of log forests that have been turned into palm oil plantations, which you kind of think that's horrendous. Talking to our local guide, though, he said that creates enough economic benefit for them that the people of Sabah tend to stay in Sabah, because otherwise they'd have to leave the island and go into one of the big cities for employment. So it's always interesting that we put our perspective on what we see in the landscape, but you have to remember that the individual local cultures that even though it might not be a very high biodiversity area, those palm oil plantations are very, very important to their well-being. This is a younger forest that's just in the process of sort of naturally regenerating. One of the really neat places, one of the national parks we went to was a coastal rainforest reserve. And they had this beautiful canopy walkway, probably from the beginning of the walkway when it left the ground to the end where there's a really nice high tower and a couple of towers along the way. It's probably about a 15-20 minute walk. So you can imagine it's a pretty extensive walkway system. And it really gives you that opportunity to get above some of the trees and really look into some of these canopies where a lot of the biodiversity lives. This was one of the local city parks of black-naped parrot. Now this interesting mammal, the colugo, often when we go on these trips, we kind of set up set up a target bird that I really want to see. Well, Gail set up 2 target mammals she really wanted to see. And this is one of them. This guy, he's got big webs between his legs. So he's an arboreal mammal, but he can glide. And he can glide up to about 60 or 70 meters between trees. They primarily go out there feeding nocturnally. And in the daytime, you find them roosting on the tree trunks. This guy was obviously doing a little bit of screening. But
Andrew, how big would that be?
I don't know, about 16, 17 inches, 18 inches.
Bigger than a flying squirrel.
Oh, yeah, quite a bit bigger than the flying squirrel. But probably much more effective at gliding because it got much bigger webs between the legs. But it's kind of a bizarre kind of mammal. This is it's not endemic to Borneo, but it's found on the Malaysian peninsula as well. But I think he was just cleaning himself, but normally they could eat frogs, they eat insects, flowers, different kinds of fruit.
The pink part you see is the bottom of this.
He's got his foot up there as well. You can see his tongue there as well. Yeah, so you can see part of the big web here between the legs. Yeah, very interesting posture to be photographed in. This is just a little bit of diversity of some of the forest flowers that we saw. I think I probably have to enter these into something like iNaturalist so that other people can identify them for me. We haven't done that yet. One of the forest fungi we saw. Again, I'd probably have to put in the iNaturalist to try to get it identified. One of the monkeys that we saw was the northern gray gibbon. Gibbons basically don't have any tails, but these guys, when they're in the trees, they're one of the fastest mammals you can imagine, moving from sort of treetop to treetop. And when we were in the canopy on that canopy walkway at the tower at the end. So I don't know how far, we're probably like 100 feet off the ground, and there was a gibbon in the tree beside us, and he decided he was going to drop down. Well, he just jumped. And he probably jumped about 70 or 80 vertical feet into the top of a shrub. Then he was gone. And there was a younger one there that was obviously not quite as bold, and there's a long vine hanging down. So that the younger one just grabbed onto the vine and slid down the vine instead. But watching one of these things just launch himself in the space, it was pretty neat to see. Now there's all sorts of interesting creatures in these forests. These are just a couple of spiders that we found to photograph. The pig-tailed macaque, this particular macaque tends to spend most of its time on the ground. You find them in big sort of family groups. They're named for their tail shape, which is like a little pigtail. But they're very good climbers, but they just sort of, I guess they do most of their traveling on the ground. One of the really neat sort of target birds we saw was the Bowler's pheasant. Now, a lot of these, I'll show you a couple more shots of birds in a similar group. But what they do to try to see these is really hard. You might hear them. So what they do, they set up these hides where they regularly put out food for the birds. And so you go sit in a hide and you wait half an hour or an hour or something. And a bird like this will wander out of the woods looking for food. You get to see it and photograph it. But otherwise, your chances of seeing this are pretty slim. And the people that set up the hides are charging for you to go and use that hide. So it's kind of an ecotourism kind of thing. We went to one hide. It was a monstrous structure. It was all done with platforms and canvas tents. There's the main viewing tent. In the adjacent room, they had a place where they were heating waters. You could have coffee and tea. There's washrooms. There's a concession stand there, I think. It was just, and again, I said the guy charged you to go and use his hide, but he made a living at it. This dark-necked tailor bird has an interesting species name of Plavaventa, which means it's got a yellow belly or yellowish belly. Another one of the birds we saw from a hide were these crested firebacks. The male in the front, the two females in the back. Two more in that group, the partridges and this mountain pheasant, peacock pheasant. So the male of the crested partridge, it's got the big crest on the head, of course, and it's got a white forehead. So that's a male. The mountain peacock pheasant, a lot of these birds are very, very shy and elusive. Again, you're just probably never going to see them unless you can get them into a regular feeding spot and see them from a hide where you can't disturb them. This particular peacock pheasant was also on the Malaysian peninsula. Now, one of my favorite groups of birds in Asia are the pittas. If it was in South America, we'd call them ant pittas. It's a very similar style of bird. These are just two of the pittas we saw. And the Borneo banded pitta was my target bird. The first hide we went into, within 20 minutes, this bird came out. That was a big check mark for me. So, so the trip was a success of day one, and the rest was all bonus. There's a really interesting group of mammals there called tree shrews, which is not something you'll find in the Americas. And there's little ones and bigger ones, and they all tend to have sort of a shrew-like nose on them. And they'll climb trees and forage in the ground. And of course, if you're putting out food for a pheasant or a peacock, these guys figure out that they can come and eat too. So you tend to get a whole diversity of mammals and birds coming into these hide situations. Interesting enough, this is the only woodpecker species we saw and photographed on the whole trip, the banded woodpecker. When we were up in the canopy tower, at the very top of the tower where the gibbon was, there was this violet cuckoo sitting up in a close by branch. Unfortunately, you can't see its back because its back is actually violet colored. And he wouldn't shut up. He just sat up there and sang and sang and sang and sang. We're probably up there 20 minutes or longer. And he just kept on going. And he'd hop around a little bit so you get a different view for a different photograph. This is one of the colorful flowers we saw along the way. Some sort of lily. Something that, we normally only see in a commercial greenhouse, probably. The green magpie, it was an interesting bird with the black mask and the very pale eye. And the silver-eared messia, the sad note about these guys is, you see how colorful they are. They're probably about 4 or 5 inches long. They're commonly captured and put into cages, sold as a cage bird.
And the piece that you have beside indicating endangered.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So, no, not endangered, endemic. Sorry, endemic on the island of Borneo. We saw about 6 or 7 different kinds of hornbills. This is just an example of one of them. Hornbills are cavity nesters. And at least on one of the species, when they create they're on their nest, the female lays the eggs, and then the female almost gets, they use mud to kind of pack the hole almost totally closed. So she stays in there on the eggs until the eggs hatch. And then the male, can bring in food for them and stuff and sort of open up the hole again. So I guess it's sort of for protection. If there's not a cavity there, you're not going to go and steal the eggs, or you're not going to have a snake crawl in with you.
Is that one really subject to poaching badly too? Because I was reading Cornell magazine and they say the hornbills are really suffering worldwide.
I didn't hear anything about them poaching because they're not what you typically expect, for a caged bird, which are. They all have these massive big bills, and there's something called I think it's called a carac. It's a whole different, some of them have a whole different segment on the top of the top bill. So it's almost like a third chunk. This one doesn't, it just has a heavy bill. This is one of our target mammals again, the orangutan, the gorgeous male. We saw this fellow from the boat. This is the third ape that we've been lucky enough to see. We saw chimpanzees and mountain gorillas in Africa. Now we've seen orangutans in Borneo. Now, apes, like the orangutan, they're really great up the trees, but they don't tend to jump from tree to tree like a monkey. The ape tends to come down the tree onto the ground, walk to the next tree, climb that tree up. And you always find them in these trees with lots of fruit, often some species of fig tree. Now they have a sanctuary for orangutans that are being, hit by cars or poached and captured, and so they have this big sanctuary, and you can pay. You go into the sanctuary. They have feeding time. So on the left there, you can see the female orangutan, and it's a fairly newborn baby. And she's chowing down on a bunch of vegetables that they're supplying her with. We're out walking on a road one day in the middle of the day, bird watching. And the previous day, we'd seen this orangutan way up on the top of the ridge at the top of a tree. So we're kind of distant and looking at it through spotting scopes. Well, he decided he was moving to a different tree. And just as we got there on the road, we heard this noise in the bushes, and out he walked. And you see one of the characteristics of orangutans, their front legs are much longer than their hind legs. So that tend to walk sort of more upright. And he kind of watched us, but he didn't seem really scared about us. He crossed the road, and he actually came towards us before he cut off into the jungle again. So it's kind of a neat example, seeing one out in the middle of nowhere. One of the snakes that we saw, I think we only saw a couple of different snakes. This keeled pit viper was sitting up in a shrub. We're just off the edge of the canopy walkway, and he was there. He was shown to us by one of the local guides, and we're up on the walkway the next day, and you're still in exactly the same spot. So they obviously do their hunting by ambush. They just kind of sit there and wait for the prey to come to them. No, I don't know how long he was in total. He wasn't a monster snake. He may be only a couple of feet long, but all coiled up. This is probably the commonest monkey we saw, long-tailed macaque. They're down in the city. They're in the jungle. They're at the roadside eating areas. They tend to be very noisy. They're often in big groups. You get a big troop of them. They're very noisy, but they're very funny to watch. You get the youngsters that are, we saw one group that were walking along a wire, and they try to knock each other off the wire kind of stuff as they're flying. Now this creature, the tiger leech, the dreaded tiger leech, this guy It's probably only about 2 inches long. They tend to be very colorful, get lovely blues and greens. And fortunately, we only encountered them one day on one walk. But we were wearing what you call leech socks, which you put over they're inside your boot, but you put over, they sort of pull up into sort of mid-thigh. And they're, because a normal fabric, like a cotton fabric, these guys are so small, they just go right through it. Well, my leech socks didn't work too well. And I got 3 leeches attached to me, and so when I pulled out the leech socks, and off popped the leeches. The interesting thing is that they when they attach, they put in an anticoagulant in the bite. So even after you remove the leeches, the wounds will continue to bleed for quite a while.
You couldn't feel them?
Sorry?
Could you feel them?
No. After a while, when they're attached, you could, but they would just appear on you. You'd be looking at your hand, and 1 second they weren't there. The next time you had one on your hand or crawling up your leg. They're heat seeking. So they're looking for like mammals, and they can detect it from probably about a meter away, the body heat. And that's what attracts them. And this one trail we went on was hardly a trail or mainly bushwhacking. That's where we encountered all the leeches. And the wetter it is, the more they like it. Yeah, they're not like ticks or something, so. The largest squirrel that we saw was the black-banded squirrel. And one of his characteristics, as you can see in the left-hand photograph, they have these beautiful orange bellies. And this is Borneo's probably biggest squirrel. This lovely guy is a red leaf monkey, or also called the maroon leaf monkey. And they really like the very wet rainforest. So we saw this in the Dana Valley, which is sort of in the southern part of Sabah. And that's where you get up to 10 feet of rainfall per year. These guys are fairly solitary. They have very large home ranges without many in it. And they're fruit eaters for that half of the year when there's fruit available. And the other half of the year, they're probably just eating a variety of leaves and shoots. But a beautiful color. This female bird's orange-bellied flower pecker. So this is almost like a hummingbird equivalent. They'll hover in front of the flowers and they're nectaring and stuff. You can see the end of the beak. There's its tongue hanging out. And they'll either hover in and stick their tongue down the trumpet of the flower, or if the flower is too deep, they can actually peck a hole in the side of the fluorescent and suck the nectar out the hole. And there was probably, 4 or 5 different species we saw. The males are very colorful. And when we're driving along, we encountered a couple of spots where on the roadside there'd be a sign for rafflesia. And at first, we didn't know what rafflesia was. Rafflesia is the world's largest parasitic plant. So that's the flower on the left there. It only blossoms once a year. It smells like rotten meat, so that attracts in all sorts of insects which help pollinate it. On the right there is sort of the bud of the rafflesia had not yet opened, and there's a few areas where this plant grows. So the locals have figured out that they can charge a fee to come onto your property to see these guys. So we paid our fee and we went onto this property, and they're probably about 2 feet in diameter or more, bigger than that, maybe 3 feet in diameter. So they're quite a large flower. And there's 4 or 5 different species in the world. The third group that I'd like to talk about a little bit are the higher elevation montane mountain forests. If you remember from the map of Borneo at the beginning there's that sort of mountain range that goes right up the spine of Borneo. So it's kind of up in those hills. There's a mountain just close by to where we came to Borneo called Mount Kinabalu. You fly into a city called Kota Kinabalu, And then Mount Kinabalu is about 14,000 something feet. It's quite close to the city. And it's a national park, so there's a drive up into it. There's a combination there. And then the very upper portion of it is a very popular hiking trip. And you can walk up the mountain. Few years ago, they had this big landslide on the trail that killed, I think, 10 or 12 young people that were hiking at the time. So they became much more careful about who they let on the trail and under what conditions. Before you were just able to drive to the end of the road and walk it. Now you have to have your reservation and you pay for that privilege. And as you see, it's higher up, it's in the clouds, so you get, that sort of cloud forest effect. One of the sought after birds up there on the mountainside is the white-headed strogan. This is a very quiet, secretive bird. We're able to see both male and female. But this is a very popular target for photographers. We saw a lot of people with those gigantic lenses walking up and down the road. This is one of the species they're after. So we happened to stop in the area for a snack, and then it flew. So that was nice to see. One of the more montane monkeys is the white-eyed Cerulli. And if you look at the one on the left, you can see the white fur on the thigh, which gives it its name. They have very long tails. They're very, very acrobatic, very good climbers, and they swing from tree to tree. Another white-headed bird is the white-headed broadbill. So I showed you the black and red broadbill over the water. This particular species eats fruit. And you can see the female on the left there in her nest, and the male was just sitting close by, but it's a spectacular green color. Now, Whitehead, you might ask, who is he? He was a British explorer and naturalist. And, did a lot of early collecting of a lot of species. This is endemic to those montane forests of Borneo, and he's the largest broadbill. He's about 10 and a half inches. And they say he's mainly a fruit eater. Another one of the really interesting mammals we saw was the binturong, or also known as the bear cat. It's a mainly arboreal mammal, but they're very nimble up there, or they're not nimble, so they won't jump between trees. So like we're going from feeding tree to feeding tree, they have to climb all the way down, move on the ground, and climb up a new one. But they eat fruit and birds, and small mammals and stuff. This photograph was taken by our guide the day before we got there. The next day, we sat there and looked at this tree. There's a big fig tree on the ridge top. Wanted to see the binturong. We probably stayed there for an hour, and this is no activity. But the hornbills were flying in and out of the tree. And this one hornbill flew into the tree, and there's a large epiphytic group of plants way up in the tree. And the hornbill landed on this epiphytic clump of trees, and out came the binturong, who's obviously sleeping in that epiphytic clump. So we got to see him very briefly. But when Avery was there, he's probably out feeding and stuff for longer periods of time. But I never even heard of a binturong before. So those of you who know Dave Fraser and Leah Ramsey, David's he's a really good artist. And they decided as a project, they'd put together a children's book where they'd go through the alphabet and come up with an animal or something that they had seen. He would paint a picture of it, and Leah would do some research and write up some text, and they're going to produce this kind of dictionary book for kids. And the binturong was one of the animals that he selected. I think he also selected the colubra. A couple more of the interesting flowers we saw. Three more of the interesting flowers. So if you look at the orange plant, can you see something on that orange flower? It's a kind of mantis, like a praying mantis, but it's not a praying mantis. It's one of the other members of that same family. But he's very sort of scrawny and leaf-like, and sort of totally disguised in there. And then there's a fly or bee something on the yellow flower on the left. We saw quite a lot of caterpillars, but these are two of the more interesting ones we saw. They probably both have, I've forgotten the term for it, for the hairs that sting. So you're not supposed to touch these guys. Sorry? Urticating. Because they hurt. Very good. Very. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of fig trees there, and fig trees are very popular for the birds and the mammals because they're a major source of fruit. This particular species, the fruit forms right on the main stems. And our guide explained to us how these things become pollinated as flowers. It's quite a complicated process by which they'll get pollinated, and so you get the fruits forming. Besides Borneo, we also spent 3 or 4 days outside Kuala Lumpur, which is on the main Malaysian peninsula, just north of Singapore. And we're up in the hills there, the Fraser Hills, and we stayed at this. It was sort of like a bed and breakfast, but it was sort of run by a naturalist guy, and he'd only let sort of biologists, naturalists come and stay at his bed and breakfast. So everybody there was interested in snakes or spiders or whatever. This guy was a retired cinematographic guy from the BBC. As an interesting side note, we met his son, who was 18 at the time we met him. When his son was 12, one of his son's photographs got selected for the wildlife photographer exhibit that we see coming through the Royal BC Museum every year. So, and he had a big sort of sheet, probably about the size of the screen, out on his patio on a frame, and he'd have lights on it every night. And he'd been doing that for the past 10 years. And he was connected to an entomologist in Australia, but he wouldn't allow any collecting. So all his collecting was through photographs. And he has photographed over 6,000 different species of moths would come to this one patio at his bed and breakfast. So, a phenomenal diversity of a group that we often don't think about very much. And the Atlas moth there that's sitting on my hand is the world's biggest moth, which I'd seen when I was growing up. I was very interested in butterflies and moths, so I'd seen the pictures in the book. So to actually be able to hold one of these live ones, have it sit in your hand, it was kind of special for me.
Pretty thick. Is it heavy?
It's just it's a big silk moth.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty solid. And we saw when we were there, we were there for 2 nights, I think. And so you get up early in the morning, you go up before the birds or the owls or the lizards or something would come and clean a lot of these insects off. And we saw several of these Atlas moths, lots of the golden emperor and similar species. And of course, it collects a lot of other insect types are also attracted at night to this lighted sheet. At least pygmy squirrel is the world's smallest squirrel. And that's another illustration that's showing the muzzle a little better on the tree shrew. Oh, by the way, the least squirrel, again, it's an endemic to Borneo. So we were walking into one of these hides one day and we encountered a tortoise beside the trail, this Asian forest tortoise. This is probably the world's oldest tortoise, not in terms of years, but in terms of evolutionary age. And all the other species of tortoise, when they're reproducing, they'll lay eggs, but they bury those eggs in the soil. These guys actually make a nest on the top of the ground and lay the eggs in the nest, which I thought was just an interesting little tidbit of information. Saw lots of different lizards of different types. Again, don't know the species of them. Some of them, better camouflaged than the others. Some quite colorful. This lovely guy was probably about 2 or 3 inches long, rhinoceros beetle. He's a member, he's one of the scarab beetle families. And they can't fly very fast, but they're not sought after as a food because that sort of heavy armor that they have sort of prevents a lot of things from eating them. Again, when you're out there bird watching, you see all sorts of other creatures and so these are a couple of the butterflies that we encountered along the way. Gail was able to get them identified by using it. It's just amazing how many online references there are now for some of these more popular groups. So if you're willing to, scan through the 1,500 photographs in the collection, say, oh, there's the same one that I have. Finally, one of the joys of traveling with a group was eating lunches and suppers. And it's very common there. You tend to eat a lot of either Malayan food, but there's also a lot of Chinese people there and Chinese food. So we'd sit at one of these round tables with a lazy Susan in the middle. The guide would go and order, 5 or 6 different dishes for you, and you get to sample all these different dishes. And one of our members was a vegetarian, so there'd always be 1 or 2 vegetable dishes, which we all enjoyed. And then they had these really colorful desserts, and I just really liked the green color of this particular cake. So that concludes my talk on the natural stage. Kind of wanted to give you just a sort of a quick sort of oversight of some of the diversity of things that we find in places like Borneo. So are there any more questions?
Computer, so we can see if there's any questions from the Zoom room.
Okay.
No, no questions. Anyone in the Zoom room have a question for Andrew? If you can put it in the chat, that would be great. You can try with the microphone if you'd like, but if we can't hear you, we'll ask you to type it in.
Andrew, how long did you spend on the trip?
The Borneo portion, I think, was 15 days, and then 4 days in the Fraser Hills. And then we had 2 or 3 days in between. There's a national park just out Kinabalu, which was, we went out snorkeling for a day there. So we got to see some of the marine diversity. We don't have an underwater camera, so we weren't able to take any photographs of what we saw there, but it's a very, very friendly country. They're slowly building their ecotourism business, which, as you know, is a great way to create employment and bring money into the country without sort of raping any of the resources or destroying the forests and stuff. So
Some comments from people saying fabulous photos of presentation, and thanks, Andrew and Gail.
spectacular photographs from Gail.
Thank you.
Year and a half to talk while being in Australia.
Tell us about the tidal range.